Welcome to Podcast, the Business of Dentistry podcast, brought to you by Practice Plan. Podcast delivers the best business advice, real-life stories, and practical hints and tips to make your practice a more profitable and sustainable business. And now, here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Les Jones. I'm the Creative Director at Practice Plan. And I'm very pleased to say I'm joined today by the irrepressible Chris Barrow. Hi, Chris.
How are you, Les? Lovely to see you.
I'm very, very good, thank you. And we're here for this podcast. We're going to talk about what the future of dentistry looks like, which is very apt because we had this conversation about 5 years ago on a podcast.
We did.
And you kind of got your crystal ball out and you kind of told us what your thoughts were for the future. I'm just wondering, on reflection, how much came true?
Do you know, it's a very interesting question. The first thing I'm delighted about is that you're not going to play back that recording, or, you know, a bit like Keir Starmer hold up a pledge card.
Yes.
Here's the 10 things that you said were going to happen. Because one of the things I always love to say is that I do like predicting the future of dentistry, but I always share with my own audiences that what you need to be aware of is that 50% of my predictions come true, but I never know which 50% it's going to be.
Yeah.
I think somebody else came up with that phrase in
I think
history.
that was an advertising thing. Yeah.
But you know, generally speaking, I listen. My approach to life is to be mindful of the negative, because it would be irresponsible not to be mindful of the negative, but to also focus on the positive. And one of the things that I have shared with my audiences over the years is that whenever you take a screenshot of the world, there's always a list of things to be miserable about. And there's always a list of things to be happy about. And so what would have happened 5 years ago is that predictably I would have said, well, here's 10 things that we ought to be miserable, mindful, wary of. But here's another 10 things that we can be very, very positive about. And in that context, what I'm actually going to say is that nothing's changed. And what I actually mean by that is that we've still got a happy list and we've still got a sad list. The content of the list changes over time. And probably, if I had been sat here 5 years ago making a prediction, I would not have been suggesting that there was going to be a global pandemic.
No.
I would not have been suggesting that the UK economy might be thrown into a tailspin by some potentially irresponsible financial decisions made by the government of the day. I probably wouldn't have predicted the fact that we would have a severe labour shortage in the clinical landscape, nor would have I have predicted that at some stage in that 5-year period there was going to be a 12-month period in which payroll costs in dentistry went up by 40% in 1 year. But actually that's what has happened pretty much over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So what we've got to do all the time is to be mindful of the sad list, the dangers, but also to be optimistic about the happy list, the opportunities that we've got. And I think it's worth probably, and I've no doubt, Les, we're going to be moving on to say, okay, well, what is actually on the sad list at the moment? What do we need to be worried or careful about? And what can we be optimistic about as well?
Yeah. Before we get on to that, which might be related to what you're going to say, you mentioned Keir Starmer's kind of, pledge card.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in May. There's going to be election
Sometime.
at the very latest in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah.
All the indications are that Keir Starmer's going to get in and the Labour Party going to get in. What's your feeling as to how they might approach where dentistry is at the moment?
All right, well, I'm going to answer that two parts. Part one, if we'd have been sat here a week before the Brexit referendum, we probably would have said that it was pretty certain that we were going to vote to remain, and we didn't. So I think we all, bearing in mind that somebody might be watching this recording in a year from now, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that when everybody says it's a slam dunk for a political party, that's actually a moment where you need to just hold on.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when it looks like a slam dunk for a particular political party, there are people who maybe don't normally vote, who are motivated to get out their armchairs and pop down the polling station. So I agree with you that the pundits would suggest a change of government, but I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion.
No.
However, let's assume that we see a Labour government. And this is where I'm going to play the age card, right? I'm 70 years old. I started full-time employment in 1970. My first general election, I think, was about 1973. I've seen a lot of governments. I've seen a lot of Tory governments. I've equally seen something that a lot of people in the UK haven't seen. That's a lot of Labour governments. And those Labour governments, whether they are led by Harold Wilson or whether they are led by any other Labour Party leader, tend to do the same thing. They tend to raise taxes. They tend to throw money at the public sector, and they tend to stimulate the economy by inward investment. And the interesting thing about that is that for the owners of small businesses, that actually can be a very positive factor in the short term, because what Labour governments do like to do is to get the great British public spending. Now, there might be a price to pay for that later on in the economic cycle. But my prediction is that if we see a Labour government, what we'll see soon after that is a boom economy. And all I would say to people is make hay whilst that sun shines, because what I've also discovered is that the reason that Labour governments tend to not stick around very long is that there's usually a price to pay for that boom economy somewhere down the economic cycle. And that's where the voters then lose confidence, and it's a bit like an elastic band that suddenly springs back and says, well, let's put the Tories back in again because at least they're a known entity. So it sounds like we're about to go through another cycle.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me wonder, in terms of the NHS, there's been a lot of talk over the last 5-10 years at least about the sustainability of NHS dentistry in its current form, and whether it should go to a core service and change its kind of dynamic in that way. I'm just wondering whether the new government is the kind of that line that says, here's your opportunity to kind of do that, or whether you think Labour will continue to pay lip service, if you like, to the dental sector.
Well, let's go back to Tony Blair in a Labour Party conference in the mid-90s, was it? Who stood up and said, one of the promises that we make is that every adult in the United Kingdom will have access to NHS dentistry. And that actually became an election pledge, you may recall. And that's the kind of election pledge that I would expect a newly returned government to pick up the baton and run with again. And so for me, my expectation is that the issue will be access. Access to what is a decision that we need to consider in the profession, but I'm not entirely sure that the politicians are actually bothered so long as they can turn around and talk about access. And in fact, we've recently seen that when you think about the way that the politicians, as it were, published the rescue package. If you actually kind of drill down into all of that and remove all the rhetoric, it's just about access.
Yeah.
It's still the same message.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that the labour shortage in the clinical market is about to be solved by the importation of overseas clinical labour. So that solves the access problem, and then we can all get on and argue about other things.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on about your list of 10 things to be wary of, or that might cause trouble in the future, and 10 things that are positive, more happy.
Yeah.
Let's start with the downsides.
All right. Well, that's in some respects that's quite easy, because I've been talking about this for so long that I've actually kind of come up with a mantra, And the mantra is what I call the 3 R's, letter R's, and the 3 letter P's. So let's go through the 3 R's. Recruitment, retention, remuneration. Recruitment is more of a challenge. Both clinical and non-clinical recruitment is more of a challenge now than it has been for a long time. Retention is more of a challenge. And what I mean by retention is that some people are deciding to leave dentistry because they think it's too hard or not well paid enough. And some people are being poached and headhunted by other dental organisations in order to solve their problems. Recruitment, retention, remuneration. Back to my earlier point, 40% increase in payroll costs. And may I say that what we are doing is restoring the differential of those dental employees, because the reality has been that they've been underpaid for 2 decades. And what that 40% increase, which has been initiated and motivated by the cost of living crisis, is really restoring dental team members back to a level of remuneration that they should have been at in the first place. So nobody's making any hay out of this. So there's the first 3, and then what we do is that segues down into the 3 P's. My 3 P's are production and productivity and profit. And what I mean by that, again, is that in these times where the financial management of dental businesses has become more difficult as costs have gone up. Sorry, I should have said production prices and profit. Let me get that right. And we've seen this increase in the operating costs of business. And so we're now in a situation where I'm spending a lot of time talking to my clients about productivity targets for fee earners. That there's a minimum viable productivity at which a fee earner is profitable to the practice, and that now needs to become a production target. You can't take a clinician, put them in a room, leave them to it, and then hope that at the end of the day there's going to be some money in the till. There's not enough wriggle room now to make that work. So production first, price is second. My clients on average put their fee per item prices up last year by 25%, and those same clients have put their fee per item prices up by another 25% this year in the first quarter. And by and large, those clients are coming back to me and saying, we've lost 3 or 4 patients, everybody else had a bit of a grumble, and then they've got on unpaid. My fear is that there are people that are listening to this broadcast who haven't put the prices up by that amount, and therefore there's only one final consequence, and that's my final P, profit. The profit margin is being squeezed. And throughout dentistry, we're seeing squeezed profit margins, irrespective of the treatment modality, although I am going to say some treatment modalities more squeezed than others. So you've got to be careful in looking at, I could add a 4th P on there for product mix, and say that you've got to look very carefully at what you're actually selling to your patients, because there might not be any profit in it. So there's my sad list.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get optimistic.
Let's get optimistic. Point number 1. We are almost at the end of an economic cycle which has been very difficult. And life being what it is, that means that we're about to move into an economic cycle that's going to be very advantageous. And as I said earlier on, a change of government could accelerate that process. So I think that the prospects for the economy, notwithstanding pandemics and geopolitical upheavals, generally speaking, the prospects for the economy going forward, I think we're going to now move into a cycle of growth. Good for business. Number 2, I'm a member of a demographic, us baby boomers, that are living 25 years longer than our parents, that are fitter and healthier than our parents, that are more affluent than our parents were, and that have got a lot of things left on their bucket lists that our parents never aspired to. And I'm sat right in the middle of that demographic. I was born in 1953. Baby boomer is 47 to 57. So I'm the perfect example.
Yeah.
I'm 70, I'm as fit as a fiddle. I've just come back from 6 days cycling in the Alps. I've got 2 marathons that I'm entered for the end of this year. I've got loads of life left to live. and I want to look good and feel good, and my teeth are included in that category. And so I'm the perfect patient because number one, I'm living longer. Number two, I'm aspirational. And number three, I've got the money. And the reason I've got the money is because I'm an empty nester. And I'm now spending money in John Lewis's baby department for grandchildren. I'm not spending money on school fees and mortgages and all the rest of it. So we are the best clients for dentistry in the world. And the final great thing about that is that we've got complex problems that require expensive solutions. Sounds like a good business opportunity.
Sounds like a perfect storm.
Now, mindful of the fact that I'm here for Practice Plan, I also believe that we are seeing an ever increasing awareness of health, and whether it's mental fitness, physical fitness, or emotional fitness, there are more people who aspire to be fitter. And part of that process lends itself ideally to the sale of a dental plan, because why wouldn't it make sense to do that for yourself and your family? So I think that, you know, that sometimes in the past, apart from a conversion, there's been a lot of clients over the years who have signed patients into a plan because it gave them a discount on an item of treatment, and that will always continue to be the case. But I think also that we can start to work more and more now on delivering an oral health message that says that by being a member of a dental plan, you're doing that which is going to secure your oral health and your appearance right the way through into your later life. And so that gives us the opportunity to go to those younger families, middle-aged and younger families, and say, why not make an investment in yourself? So that's a great thing. And the other thing I'm going to say, which I'm excited, amazed, blown away by every single week of my working life, is the D word, digital, and the AI word, artificial intelligence. Now, I'm just about to go onto a panel to talk about the future of AI in dentistry. I've got some things to say about it, some of which you probably won't like, but when was that ever not the case? All right. But when I look at the advances that are taking place in technology within dentistry, when I look at the advances that are taking place in machine learning applied to dentistry, both in diagnostics and in delivery of treatment, but also in the customer experience, we'll talk about that later on this afternoon here at the show, it's an incredible landscape. And I've been very fortunate over the last 3.5 years to be able to get involved in delivering webinars on the subject of intraoral scanning, webinars on the subject of artificial intelligence in CRM software, lots of other things. And oh my God, we were talking about this earlier on, Les. I wish I was 50 years younger because I want to stick around and I want to see where this goes. But if any of my grandchildren came to me and said, Grandad, I'm considering a career in dentistry, I would say, fill your boots, girl, and get in there, because I think it's an incredible space to be in going forward.
Yeah. I should say, for anyone watching or listening back to this, on our website, Chris and I sat at the dentistry show, and we found 15-20 minutes to kind of have a chat. So that's the reference to the panel discussions that later on today. I also just wanted to pick up on, you were talking about the positivity then in terms of the opportunity for growth. One of the things that we're very conscious of at Practice Plan, it'd be good to get your thoughts on, is that from our perspective, it feels like there's never been a better time if you're an NHS dentist and you're actually looking to move to private and build that plan up than right now, in that many of those traditional barriers to that would hold people back as a result of what's happening in NHS dentistry and COVID and stuff have kind of disappeared almost, allowing that people to kind of move into the private space and build their practice in that capacity quite quickly.
It's 30 years since my first dentist as a client, and can you imagine me 30 years ago being able to say, we're going to set up a national advertising campaign, and actually not only are we going to get terrestrial channels, but we'll also get satellite TV channels involved in this campaign as well. In fact, a lifetime first, even though the BBC don't do advertising. We're going to get them to do advertising for us. And what we're going to do, all those TV channels, we're going to get them to advertise the fact that you can't get in to see an NHS dentist because the country is full of dental deserts. We're going to advertise the fact that there's going to be huge waiting lists for treatment even if you do get in to see an NHS dentist. And we're also going to advertise the fact that in the private sector, there is technology development that's taking place, which is making the delivery of solutions for you to be less discomfort, more effective, and more aesthetically pleasing over time. Now, can you imagine me going to a dentist 30 years ago and say, and we're going to spend billions doing that promotion for you so that you can sit there and watch people knocking on the door saying, can I come in? Well, it just happened.
Yeah.
So given that every TV, radio station and social media channel is telling everybody in the world that they can't get access, and that actually if they want, should we call it the full Monty, they need to go down the private route. Why wouldn't you take the opportunity to get onto that particular bandwagon and run with it?
Yeah. Very well, very, very well put. Chris, we've come pretty much to the end of our time. We've talked about some of the, let's say, negative challenges that dentists are facing going forward. We've also talked about the positives and the opportunities. On balance, which side are you coming down on in terms of where dentistry is going over the next 5 years?
Well, the economic cycle that we've been through, some people have described it as a recession. Some people have denied that it's a recession, but I think most of us would agree that we've just been through a recession. It's my 7th since I started work. And in 1973, we had a miners' strike and a 3-day week. By the way, everybody gets terribly excited about lockdown. My first lockdown was 1973, because on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, they sent us home and said, don't come back to work till Monday, because the miners weren't digging coal and there was no electricity coming out of the power stations. And a few people might be old enough to remember that.
I remember it very well.
And we all thought we were going to die, but we didn't. We bounced back. And then in 1979, my mortgage interest rate went to 19%. And I didn't go and knock on my boss's door and said, can I have a pay rise? Because he'd have probably punched me in the face. What I did was I turned around to my wife and I said, we're not going on holiday this year. And then in 1987, after the storm in the southeast on the Friday, we had Black Monday in the stock markets, and the British stock market globally fell by 70% in one day. And we all thought we were going to die, and we didn't. We bounced back. And in 1992-3, Margaret Thatcher tearfully walked out of Downing Street for the last time, and we fell into an economic recession, and we thought we were going to die, and we didn't. And then in 2008, the banks collapsed worldwide, and we all thought we were going to die, and we didn't. And then in 2020, we had a global pandemic, and we all thought we were going to die, and most of us didn't. But we bounced back. And that's because that's human nature. We bounce back. We're all little Mr. Weebles and Mrs. Wobbles, all right?
Yeah.
And we don't fall over, we just bounce back. So bring it on Keir Starmer, bring it on Rishi Sunak, whoever you want to send down the pipe, I don't care.
Yeah.
And bring on geopolitical and bring on pandemic, because what we'll do is we'll bounce back. Because we always do.
It's a very positive note to finish on. We've been talking about the future, Chris. We've also got a history lesson in there, I think, which has been fantastic. Chris, fascinating to talk to you as always. We should make a date in the diary right now to do this again in 5 years' time. We'll be another 5 years older, and we'll kind of we'll have a similar conversation.
And you'll say to me, you didn't predict Manchester United becoming Premier League champions again, did you?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we should be talking that pie in the sky. Chris, thanks very much.
Pleasure, Les.
Cheers.